Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salaam alaikum. Hikmah number 211 has been our discussion point. The next point that Amirul Mu'mineen makes, he says, Ashraful ghina tarkul muna, says the greatest wealth is to leave desires. When an individual does not have any attachment to anything within this world, naturally there is nothing that they can be bought out with. And thus they automatically become the wealthiest person in the world. Imagine an individual that cannot be bought through any sort of wealth or any sort of property or anything material, because that person has no desire for the material. There's the famous story of Abu Dhar when Muawiyah's soldiers came to him to try and buy him out. And they said to him, look, Abu Dhar, you're living in this place. He was at that time banished to Rabala. Says, look, you're living in this horrible little hut in the middle of the desert. Abu Dhar, Muawiyah has sent you some money. Abu Dhar says, I don't want the wealth of Muawiyah. Says, look, Abu Dhar, look at your house. How will you survive? He says, no, I'm fine. Say, look, Abu Dhar, if you're not going to care about yourself, what about your daughter? Think about your daughter. Abu Dhar says to them, look, come inside. He takes them inside this mud hut and he says to them, there are 2 loaves of bread. One loaf is for me and my wife today, and the second loaf is for me and my wife tomorrow. As for my daughter, I have taught her Surah Al-Waqi'ah, and Allah will provide for her. This is an individual who has killed all his desires, all his attachment to this world, and now no matter how much wealth is brought to him, there is nothing that can buy him. So Amirul Mu'mineen, he's saying the greatest wealth is to be able to leave desire. When you no longer desire anything, you are the wealthiest person in the world. Then he says, وَكَمْ مِنْ عَقْلٍ أَسِيرٍ تَحْتَ هَوًى أَمِيرٍ, says, and how many intellects are imprisoned by their lowly desires? How many times does it happen that an individual has become imprisoned by their desires? You can be the smartest person in the world, but when those desires start to attack you from every angle, that intellect takes a back seat. I know, for example, that I'm not hungry, but when someone brings out a big piece of cake, and especially a cake that I like, that feeling of fullness takes a back seat. And I find space. My intellect is telling me you don't need this food. You don't need this sustenance. But instead, the desire is saying, no, I might miss out on it. So I ignore my intellect that is telling me I have enough food to sustain me. But my desire is now pushing above my intellect and telling me, no, I need to eat this particular food. And so I ignore my intellect and I follow my desires. This is an intellect that is imprisoned by desires. And that also extends towards sin. I know intellectually that certain sins, or all sins in fact, are going to take me away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in certain situations, I will put my intellect on the back burner and I will follow my desires. And this is what Amirul Mu'mineen is referring to. He says that how many intellects have become imprisoned by their desires. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.